Hi, welcome to Winging It, a show by Oddbird about web design development and our approach to solving problems. Today, we'll be answering some CSS questions, so please post a question in the chat and we'll do our best to address it. I'm here with Miriam. Suzanne, how you doing, Miriam?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm hanging in there.
Yeah.
But I'm super excited for today's show. I think these not one topic shows can be
hmm
pretty fun, and hopefully we'll have some viewer interaction. But we have gathered some questions in advance, so let's go ahead and jump right in. All
Sure.
right. First question. What is likely to be the next big evolution of CSS? Is it functions, mixins, something entirely different? What do you think?
Uh, well, maybe it depends what we mean by next. Scope is probably one of the bigger changes that's almost in every browser. I think we're just waiting on Firefox, and I think there's an implementation underway. But for people who have been following along with the specs, that may feel like an old one, um, and but it's still a ways out in terms of people probably using it day to day. So I would say that's probably the next big one that nobody is talking about right now, because it's past the sort of initial stages of lots of spec discussion, and it's not quite at the stage of every browser having it. So it's in that nebulous purgatory of features.
And if we remove that word next, would you answer differently?
Well, I don't know. I mean, so the other thing I would say about scope is that it's messing with the cascade again, in a similar way to cascade layers. Uh, we're changing sort of fundamental features there. So I sort of see that as a bigger sort of evolution. Uh, Although I think maybe people will get more excited in some cases about functions and mixins, and those are on the way. At least functions are coming soon. Chrome has been really pushing on that part of the spec. So
Now,
yeah,
how far do you, if you had to guess, if you had a crystal ball, how far away are functions and mixins? And will they
functions
hit the
are
same time?
probably they're not going to be at the same time. Well,
Okay.
I mean, they might hit baseline at the same time. I think we don't really know beyond Chrome. It's very clear that Chrome wants to ship functions soon. Uh, and the spec is looking fairly solid for that. And I think they're going to be very cool. I think they're going to clean up our code a lot, but in some ways they're not. They don't give us new powers exactly. They take old powers and clean them up. So things that we could do by repeating calc functions and variables in sort of complex ways, we can simplify a lot.
So you don't think it would be like a replacement for SAS? Because we can do
Well,
more with
it will
SAS.
replace some things that people use SAS for. I would say I think of um, functions in SAS versus functions in CSS a little bit like when do you use JavaScript in the browser and when do you use Node on the server. Um, Sometimes you can solve the same problems either place, and then maybe it makes more sense to do it on the server so you're not requiring extra processing power. Um, but also some things are going to be only possible in the browser. So then we'll get sort of new abilities. Functions in CSS will be able to do things that functions in SAS couldn't. Like SAS if statements can look at the arguments you passed in, but a CSS function can look at where you are in the cascade. It can run a container query. The results can be based on sort of browser context things that SAS wouldn't know about. So it's going to be much more powerful in some ways, but it's also putting
Maybe
more
not a
processing.
replacement. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. Today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. How are you
Excellent.
celebrating? By being
I
here and answering some
yeah,
accessibility
I
questions.
haven't celebrated yet.
Okay.
Hopefully there's
Uh,
cake.
only if you make it. I
Yeah,
suppose.
okay.
All right. What are some ways you can test a site for accessibility?
Well, I can think of several. I'd like to pass that one back to you.
Okay. I have a number of tools that I often use. And this is not just a CSS question. I think this is sort of a markup and CSS
Mhm.
and content question because I think accessibility kind of runs across all of the layers of the web. But one of my like easy go-to tools is just the Wave extension. You can turn that on. You can see a lot there. What's this? Is it I'm gonna get this wrong, but I think it's Koala. It's KOA11Y. I don't know who makes it. It's a great tool to you gotta download it and you run it locally. You get a report of just so much that might be wrong with your site, but also like what you are passing, and then what type of things to test for. I'll make sure to add that in the show notes later. There's odd contrast to test your color contrast ratios, if you so choose. But a lot of stuff that we do when we build sites, we try to start with what we know is like accessible from the get-go. So not hiding the things that you shouldn't hide, making sure your links are descriptive of what you're going to send, where you're going to send someone to, of course, alt text or long descriptions. There's so much you can do, and there's so many ways you can test. I think what Lighthouse also does some
Mhm.
accessibility testing. Do you want to add
Yeah.
to that?
Yeah, and some of those automated tools are great at catching certain things and not everything.
Right.
So they're a useful place to uh, get a sense of sort of the obvious things to fix. Um, and then often a lot of them also list things that you're going to have to look at yourself. So they'll say, here are the things we couldn't check automatically. So it gives you some sort of checklist to go through. I would say, yeah, when we're trying to think of it in advance, sort of before we get to a testing stage, um, I'm opening the accessibility dev tools, which are similar to the DOM inspector or something, right? It's what is the accessibility tree that's being generated? What names do things have? What content is in there? And that's sort of a quick way to see what's being passed along to a screen reader or some other, yeah, accessible device.
I always turn on voiceover too and just tab
Hmm.
through a site to see what it says back to me. You'd be surprised that a lot of sites repeat the same thing over and over again.
Yes.
And I think if you start, testing that, you can see pretty quickly like what other ways you need to mark something up in order to have a much more concise, scannable site. If people do use visual uh, accessible
And that's one
devices,
of the things that often happens when people think they're uh, improving accessibility. Um,
they add
people
more.
add a label and add some hidden text and add more and more and more, and you can end up with sort of really over bloated, um, yeah, the same content over and over,
Yeah.
which is
I'm
not better accessibility necessarily.
No, yeah, that's the one thing I feel like you can't test for, um, yourself if you don't use these tools is, like, what amount of text you wanna include
Hmm.
or context for something like a screen reader. Like, we can certainly add everything that will be read, but it's that, like, the human interaction part. Like, what is necessary for someone to read to know, like, what's happening on the page, where they're going, and whatnot. And that's always,
Right.
like, a tricky balance without having, like, fully needed a device to use solely, to use that solely the whole time. I can't I can't answer that question really, so
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think often the answer for accessibility, people think of it as a yes or no checkbox. I think often, like, we spend a lot of time thinking about the intricacies of our UX in a lot of other ways, and then we get to accessibility and we want to just be like, it is or it isn't, when really it's the same thing. It's just usability for more people, and usability is on some gradient, and it's going to be different for different people. And so it's about thinking through, what is the interaction that we want. And if we're thinking about visual clutter, why aren't we thinking about the audible clutter in a screen reader? Or where can we add clarity without adding clutter?
Precisely. Great question, James. And we will make sure to shout out everyone who asked a question in the show notes as well. There's a lot to get through, so I'm going to go on to the next. How paved is the road to logical properties for all things?
Very unpaved. So logical properties, which is the ability to say, like, instead of left or right, um, instead say things relative to the writing mode of the document, which changes depending on languages, the writing mode and direction. So those are somewhat separate. Writing mode is like whether it's going to be horizontal lines of text that flow top to bottom, or vertical lines of text that flow right to left or left to right. And then direction is the direction of each line of text. And logical properties give us the ability to say, instead of margin right, we can say margin inline end or something. Those two in English are aligned, but in other languages won't be. So logical properties are useful for that. So we got logical properties in sort of the most obvious places, some of the default places, and they're super useful, but nobody has gone through all 560 some CSS properties to find all of the places where we have physical dimensions or physical lengths, and gone through to figure out which ones would need to be made logical, or have a logical option. And so that's where things are stalled right now. Somebody has to do the work of going through each individual property and asking, well, does this one have physical dimensions that we should be able to set logically? And then once we have the list of properties to fix, we would have to go through them individually again and determine like the right fix for each one. So yeah, the problem is that there is no pavement. This is all off-road.
Right. I mean, if that's really good answer based on the question of like how paved is the road. There's a lot more to do. A lot of times I'll see people talking about logical properties and be like, "Can I use those yet?" When they're referring to like margin block, padding
Yes.
block, padding
And
line,
yes, you can use those. They've been around for a while.
right? And they're great. Like a shorthand for just two, like the one axis, like it's amazing.
Yes.
I highly encourage everyone to
Yeah.
start using those immediately. And it's really handy to have.
Yeah.
Big fan. All right. What I added the word smaller here, but like what new CSS feature are you excited about?
I think you're excited about one, and you should go.
I'm excited about so much. Like I feel like for years CSS moved at the pace of it felt like a pace of a snail for a long time. And then starting, I don't know, right when like grids started coming out,
Mhm.
I feel like we have just taken off. And like every few days, I'll look at some MDN article and be like, oh, I didn't even know I could do that. Like when did they add the nth child from like a specific class? I thought
Right.
I'd never seen that before. And I'm interested in how these like little CSS features like creep out, and if you're not like really in the know, how you might miss some of them. I've actually wanted to start a little shorts series of like, oh, did you know you could do this now? And you couldn't, I don't know, 5 years ago, for people who may not like always be reading the working group chats or whatnot. So I'm excited. I have a code pen here. Let's see. I'm going to move it over there. And then I will share my screen. Probably. One moment.
Yeah,
This
and
is a new computer, so I don't know if I need new permissions, but here. There we
and
go.
as we're going, people feel free to ask more questions in the chat. We don't have to
Yes.
work just from our pre-collected ones.
Actually, the HTML is not very important. Relative colors is such a fun little feature if you missed it, but you can take a color, we'll say a base color, and I just threw in this OK LCH value there. And then in CSS, create another color from that color. I just did that here in custom properties. So I took the base color as the and used, sorry, the lightness value here. I'm just going to bump it up by 15%. And the format here is just you include all the letters. You can adjust every channel. Is it channel component of the color
Yeah.
separately if you want, but for just this little demo, I made a light version of my base color, and then I made a dark version, a saturated version. You can also find out the complement of that color, and just with some custom properties, you can save those and use those throughout your CSS. And I just thought it was such a handy little way. Like, I feel like when I first started using Sass, like the coolest thing was darkening a color or lightening
Right.
a color. And just to be able to like do it so nicely from CSS now is such a joy to work with.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that too. And along with it, the light dark function and the color contrast function. Light dark is a little bit farther along. I think it's already baseline, at least newly available. So it's in all the browsers. Uh, but yeah, being able to choose a different color based on whether you're in light mode or dark mode.
Yeah.
You could change these adjustments based on whether you're in light mode or dark mode. And then color contrast, once we get that, being able to provide a background color and get the right foreground color for it. Pretty
Yeah.
cool. Are you showing something else here? Oh, you're showing
No, I'm
changing
just
the
changing the
color.
base color to see
Yeah,
how easy
yeah.
it is, and they all just adjust. It feels sort of like magic, but
Now
also
this
that's
is yeah. This is a funny thing that I think you can do. I think you can use the channel names out of order. So you could like use the lightness for the new colors chroma or hue. Well, I guess hue's a different type of value, so those wouldn't switch necessarily. But you could switch the lightness in chroma. I don't know why you would do it, but I think you could do from base C and then L and then H, and you would get a new color
you mean
where
just remove
yeah,
this.
I think you have an extra parentheses there.
Yes.
Right. So now that's a new color using the same hue, but the lightness of one has become the chroma of the other.
Oh,
So you can, there might be use cases where you want to base the chroma on the lightness in some way. I don't know, but you can do that.
interesting. All right, we'll have to play with that more because I find that to be kind of fun.
Probably just swapping them isn't a use case,
Oh,
but it
no,
shows what you can do.
yeah, it's just that's another thing I have an issue with like a lot of demos out there. It shows you like what you can do, but it's like, well, why would I want to do that? Or when would
Right.
that be useful? So if you are out there making demos, like I would love it if there's some like real world use cases of why you might do the thing that it's designed to do. Yeah, that's just a friendly request. Let me leave that. I also love has. I mean, for years we're
Mm.
like, oh, we haven't been able to target the parent of a child, like the ancestor. You can do siblings, you can do children, but you couldn't go up that tree. And I'm just loving the has. if checking for has certain conditions. I feel like it makes a lot of things easier, like checked check boxes you can style a certain way. Uh, it's just lovely. So that's another like small-ish CSS feature that I adore.
Yeah, I was just looking it up quick. That is a baseline since 2023, end of 2023. So
So
it's
use
been in
it.
all browsers for a little while now.
Yeah, I think Firefox was the longest to hold out on that, but they've had it, yeah,
Hmm.
for a while. So it seems fairly safe-ish as long as that's what your project requires. All right, let's move on. What CSS syntax do you always need to look up when writing? I have a few of these.
Yeah, I didn't think of any in advance, so why don't you go ahead and I'll see what I can think of. I
Every
definitely end up
time.
on MDN all the time,
Yeah.
but
I think, it's important to let everyone know out there that I mean, I've been writing CSS for over 20 years, and I constantly have to be like, "Wait, how do you is that with a dash or" grid auto fit or autofill, I'm always like, "Is repeat first? Is there a comma after here? Min, max, and then number, space, number, value, space, value." I constantly write it wrong the first time, and then I'll go look it up and be like, "Oh, I switched these 2."
yeah,
Always.
Eric Meyer says border image stuff, and that's what I was thinking of, although I don't use it a whole lot. When I do, I sure need to look it up.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
Also, I think when and anytime I'm doing font face, just because you do it, like, once in a project, I'm always like, "Oh, wait, source, local, what do I do here? Do I need a font display here?" So that, does anything in our config fonts files, I always have to reference another project before I write those. Um,
Yeah, I think one for me too is that I often use shorthands because it's easier for me to remember one property instead of 6 separate properties. And so then when I want the longhand, I'll have to go look them up and be like, "What is that? Is that flex direction? What's the?" I just flex flow, and then I can set several things and at once. And I don't have to remember flex wrap and flex direction and whatever the others are.
yeah, I can see that. Gradient is another one for me. I'm always wondering, like, where do I put commas or just spaces? And then you have the direction in the beginning, and then does that get followed by a comma? I always have to look that up. Yeah, so that's a fun little question to think about. In 2025, is there still a use case for float?
I uh, I mean, this was several years ago that I was at a conference and I was talking to some people who had recently finished a class, and they had been told by their instructor never to use float. You're not allowed to float anything, and uh, I think that's absurd. But I'll admit I don't use it a lot. Um, I can think of a few use cases. I mean, one is the thing it's built for, which
Mhm.
is you've got an image and some text, and you want to float it to the side and wrap the text around it. That's what it's for. So it's probably the best solution to that problem. Um, but then once you start thinking about things like shape outside, uh, you can do even more interesting things, floating text around an image.
Yeah.
And following
We
a
should do
different
some
shape
shorts on
rather
that
than
too.
just the yeah. Yeah, that's a fun one to demo, and I don't know if all the browsers have it now. Firefox, I think, was the first to add it. A lot of people will jump into, like, separate tools. There's, like, shape generators where you can go and play around and move the little use a graphic interface to move little nodes around, sort of like editing an SVG, to get your shape. That's directly in the dev tools in Firefox. You don't need to remember any site to go
Usually
generate your
better in the
shapes.
dev tools because you
Yeah,
can do custom shapes.
right. It's very powerful, and I often will, if I'm not in Firefox already, jump into Firefox for figuring out shapes.
Yeah. We have a question coming up on that, so I'll save that for then. Maybe we can do a quick demo. Um, how would you suggest we apply layers to an existing project?
To an
Is this
existing
too
project.
long to go over, or do you think we can cover
No, I
this?
think we can. I think we could do a quick. So one of the things that I would do is start from the bottom, or what I think of as the bottom, because when you add something to a layer, it becomes lower priority in the cascade. So if I'm starting from the bottom, then things aren't moving far when I put them in a new layer. So I would start by taking my reset and I would put it in a reset layer. And I would say that's the very first lowest priority code. Um, Layer it right away. Everything else still works. And then I will go to the next layer and say, I don't know, maybe it's Bootstrap or something, the design system I'm using, whatever it is that comes next, layer that next. And again, we're sort of just stacking layers from the bottom and moving our way up. And then my goal would be to layer everything. I think we get the most flexibility when everything is inside a layer. So that would be the goal. But if we start from the bottom, things don't move far. We're not making huge breaking changes.
I think it would be hard, and I haven't checked on this, and I'm just thinking about using layers in like a WordPress project because any plugin you install has their own CSS that they import, and I'm just wondering, like, until you get that control over the unlayered layers, which I think is something that's being worked on. Is that right? Are we trying to, like, be able to assign unlayered layers a layer order? This is fun.
Uh, Not exactly. Well, sort of in a roundabout way. Um, what we've done instead is we've added a way to have layers above the unlayered styles. So you can go the other direction and create more powerful layers. And
Okay.
so that sort of lets you move the unlayered styles around by just by putting things above or below them. But
Okay.
you can't explicitly grab the layer that isn't there and do something with it. Um, so yeah, that'll help. Um, but I think the more everybody moves to layers, the less we have to worry about it. I mean, the other thing is if we're talking about code from outside, ideally we should be able to pull that into a layer. And that's maybe a little bit harder with a browser extension if things are getting added. But often when browser extensions are adding styles, they want to override everything. So if we have all of our styles layered, then the browser extension can come in and uh, be unlayered and still work. I don't know. I
Yeah.
guess it depends on the specifics of the situation.
We shall see how that all plays out. But I think we've answered this. I have a question here from chat. David
Yeah.
asks, I got excited by Adam Argyle's CSS carousel demo, but then saw Sarah Swadont's analysis and wondered if CSS is trying to do stuff that should be done by the browser via HTML. Thoughts?
Yeah, that's contentious debate.
Mm.
Um, I think we know that there are places where semantics and um, interaction and presentation overlap, right? So, in theory, um, HTML should be providing us with semantics, and if the browser's doing it, interaction um, might come from there. And then JavaScript is adding our own interaction, and CSS is adding presentation. Um, so then the question is, yeah, do semantics ever change based on presentation? And I think there are good arguments that it shouldn't, uh, and there are some arguments that it should. And I don't really know I don't know if there's a theoretical right answer there. And I also don't know, in the specific example of carousels, I don't know if the demo that Sarah was looking at, if that was the final proposal, or if that was an early demo of some of the concepts. I think Sarah's article is great and gives you a sense of sort of the things that we need to consider. And also, the carousel proposal is sort of 6 different proposals. I don't remember if it's 6 exactly, but there's various pieces to it. And it might be possible that some of them don't make sense for CSS and some of them do. And I know in there also there's sort of this question of inertness and some other things that, yeah, I think there's a lot of questions in any spec. So it doesn't surprise me that there's questions in this one. I don't know if that makes sense as an answer, but like, yeah, it's hard. We're trying to build new features in a web that is supposed to work across all devices for everyone. And that's just a hard problem to solve. So it doesn't surprise me when we run into problems solving it.
That's why I'm glad that you and many others are involved in the writing and debating of these things. So
yeah, I'm mostly happy when there's debate. I think Carousel, maybe one of the issues with it is that for a long time it's sort of been moving forward without a lot of debate from different parties. And so what I'm happy to see is debate. I think the masonry proposal got better once people started more actively debating it. I think Carousel's proposal will get better as people debate it. I think that's all real important.
I feel like for years, in general, it's been like why would you want a carousel? Are you trying to hide your most important content like 1/4 or 3/4 of the time? I'm sure there are probably plenty of good reasons to have that, but I would love to see those in the list of like why we're doing this in the first place.
Yeah, I think one of the answers to that is sort of a broadening out of what carousel means. Because in some ways you can think of any scrolling page as hiding some of the content, and then a carousel is just one way of accessing that content. So I would say often when we talk about carousels not being great, it's the sort of featured carousel where you're trying to fit as many things on the homepage as possible, and you do it by having everything overflow in little boxes. And that doesn't work great. But there are times when you do have a gallery of some kind where overflow makes sense, and it's
It's easy to
reasonable to
browse
have
the images
something.
or
Yeah.
something.
And then carousel just means we don't just have a scroll bar. We maybe also have ways of like jumping to specific pages or something else like that.
Yeah. All right, we will make sure to link those demos and the article in the show notes. Moving on, do you have anything? I know we talked about a few things that haven't really landed, and you can feel free to repeat those if you want, but do you have anything on your CSS wish list, either including those or in addition to those?
How much time do we have?
Yeah, pick
Um,
1 or 2.
Yeah. I mean, one of the ones that I want to work on is the logical properties. That's been sitting in the working group for several years. We actually started an open collective if people want to support that work, because there's no big company yet that has offered to pay for somebody to go through and figure out where we can apply logical properties. So if I can get some funds to work on that, I'd love to solve the problem. Another one that I think we should have is some way of setting a min-max span in grids. So we say, I'm in a, say, repeat autofit or autofill grid, and I want an element to take up one column if there's only one column, but go to take up to 3 columns if those columns are available. And I think that's a solvable problem. Without that, we have to say at this breakpoint span 2, at this breakpoint span 3, and we have to sort of manually figure out when there are more columns that we can span. And I'd like if we didn't have to figure it out if the browser could do it. So that's one of my wish list items. That's more
There's a number
niche.
of grid things like background for a cell. Is that like I haven't
Yes,
looked into any of this stuff lately. I don't even know if it's being worked on, but I know like borders for specific grid cells or between tracks
that's
would have
being
been
more
fun.
actively worked on. Styling gaps. Microsoft had a big proposal for that I think has been moving forward. I don't think there's been as much work on styling areas or cells because the thought is, I don't know, use generated content before and after pseudos or throw some divs in there or something. But
Yeah. There's also things like I think first letter. I think I wrote an article in like 2016 or 2017 or initial letter that aren't supported by all browsers. I feel like Safari might be the only one. That seems surprising to me
yeah,
that
that does seem surprising.
um,
Uh, that reminds me of I would really like to do gradient text without using like 4 different properties to like uh, set a background gradient, then clip to the text, then change the text color to transparent. It all feels just a little bit fragile to me, and I'd love to be able to do that in a simpler way. I
all
mean, I
right,
suppose
hopefully someone's
mixins and
writing these
functions were on
down.
my wish list, and they're happening, so
Yeah,
I don't have to wish for them anymore.
yeah. I long ago had regions and exclusions on that
Mm,
list. And maybe that's from my old print design days of like flowing text from one box to another. But there's not, I mean, you can do that with columns, but what if you want to place it in a different grid cell or something? So,
yeah.
I don't think it would be a huge use case, but that was always something I used to think about a lot.
Yeah,
Thought
and
would be
there's still
cool.
discussion about it in the working group.
Hmm.
I don't think it's gone. I think there's a little fear of picking it up, but
Interesting.
yeah, Eric says exclusions plus 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 plus. And James wants CSS speech, which I think also I've heard Leonie Watson talking about how nice that would be. I think that would be great.
I thought he wanted a speech on CSS. I thought that's sort of what we're doing here. Maybe not. All right. What's our next question? Oh, this is the browser inspector tools. Do you have any favorite browser inspector tools, or do you wish they did anything that they currently don't do?
I wish the Chrome and WebKit browsers would pick up everything that Firefox has. In terms of CSS, I think Firefox has some of the coolest tools. I think maybe Safari's picked up some of them, but uh, Firefox, I think, was the first with a grid inspector, and then also has a Flexbox inspector that's way more powerful than any of the other browsers. Um, they have a font inspector that's super powerful. I think that might be in WebKit now. And the shape feature that I mentioned earlier, they've just got a lot of little tools like that that are super handy in
En-
those weird
Enhancing your
situations.
experience.
Yeah, like understanding what font is being used and why, and then being able to make adjustments on the fly to a variable font. All of that is in the Firefox font inspector. Check it out.
Yeah. Instead of, I always put fantasy in between each like typeface. I'll put like something really random that I wouldn't use so I can know which one is being used. So there's
Yeah, that's
another pro
clever.
tip, or just use Firefox. But I think we should do a whole winging it on fun browser dev tools
Yeah,
and how we use them. So let's not get into that too much because I think that could be an upcoming show. Let us
sure.
know if you agree, if you have anything to add to that, you viewers. Um, but how can I be more closely involved with the core CSS language and standard?
Whew. Um, Getting involved is a little bit of a fire hose. unless you can figure out your notification settings. Um, there's sort of different levels of involvement
I'm
that
out.
you could.
My notification
You're out
settings are
already?
nuts. Yeah, I can't figure out notification settings, so sorry, continue.
Um, yeah, the first way that I ever got involved was just reading specs. And when I run into something that I can't quite figure out, looking at a spec and trying to figure out if that's a bug in a browser or if that's something in the spec, and if the spec explains why it works that way. Um, and specs can take a little bit of, there's a lot of technical lingo in a spec, but a lot of it is linked. So generally, when a technical term is used in a specification, it's linked, and you can follow the link and find the definition of the term. So it takes a little practice, but you can sort of work your way through a spec. And more specs have notes that then re-explain something in um, author language. Specs are meant to be read by authors as well, even though it doesn't always feel like it. So yeah, one way is to sort of dig into things that seem confusing, figure out what's going on, file browser issues. So before I was working on specifications or in the CSS working group, I was starting to interact with browser engineers through the Chromium bug reporter, the WebKit bug reporter, the Gecko bug reporter, Bugzilla, I guess. So yeah, starting to get active there. But then sometimes you find that the thing that you're surprised by is actually how things are defined, and all the browsers do it the same. And then you can file an issue on the CSS working group drafts GitHub, and all of the discussion is there. So it's a lot of discussion if you try to read everything, but I don't know anybody in the world that tries to read every issue. So generally what you do is subscribe to issues that are interesting to you, file your own issues, and just get notifications on those. Search for issues that seem interesting that you'd like to be part of the conversation. And anybody is allowed to comment on those CSS drafts GitHub issues. That's where I would start. And then a lot of people that end up in the working group come through starting to comment on issues, showing that you have an understanding of, mostly it's that sort of understanding of the complexity of the problem. So not assuming that fixing it for you fixes it for everyone, I guess, is the way to say that. That CSS has to work across devices and across languages and across writing modes for lots of different people doing different things. So yeah, approaching CSS with that level of stepping back and thinking about how it will impact other people.
What's the review process like? I'm sure like many duplicate bug reports are filed or issues. Like who has to go through and determine if this is a new issue or not? Or like how much time do you think is dedicated to that?
I don't know if there's anybody from the W3C that tries to do that. I have a feeling that like Chris Lilly is one of the W3C representatives on the CSS working group, and I think he does some amount of triage, but I don't know if that's daily job. Others of us that are editors will try to follow when a new issue pops up that's tagged for one of our specs. So I'm an editor on several specifications, and then I try to follow those tags, those labels, and do some triage. But if somebody doesn't find it, it will come up when discussion gets active and somebody says, "Oh, I think there was another discussion where this was already being talked about." So often there's things that are almost duplicates, but have slightly different questions, and so then it's about not deleting one, but noting what is the specific question
Linking to
here.
it. And yeah.
Yeah. And
So
linking the 2
don't be afraid
conversations
to
together.
open a duplicate if you
Yeah,
think your issue hasn't been filed, but definitely do a search first to see if there's something
right.
that exists, I think. All right. I believe you have another meeting after this, so I think we can wrap this up. Let's
All
see if we
right.
can get this quick. No, that's not it. What
Yeah,
is the right setting? I have
I
less
don't know.
settings this time. Yeah, this
David
is
is
fun.
saying in the chat, that, some more instructions on functions and mixins would be useful, so that might be something we consider doing in the future, especially if mixins are coming soon. I like you just getting bigger and smaller and
Where'd you go? Hey,
hey,
that's sorta
that's
better.
mostly there.
Ugh, people, this is hard. This is a hard job. Uh, great, Oddbird. If you're looking for a custom web project, we like to make the web a better place. Check out oddbird.dev. We have a new email course that we're just recently kicking off. James Stuckey Weber has created a course on CSS anchor positioning that's fantastic. And I know that because I get to review it. So if you're looking to learn more about CSS anchor positioning, I think it's an amazing resource. And I have a link for you all. And it's there, oddbird.dev/learn/courses/anchor-positioning. You will see
Yeah,
everything
and
you will be learning.
James has been getting deep into it, because he's been working on the polyfill, and that means reading and understanding the specs, and playing with, ways that it works. So, um, yeah, he's the person that I go to when I have questions about anchor positioning. Highly
Exactly.
recommend.
Oddbird.dev/winging it for today's show notes. Like we mentioned, we will be adding additional links that we didn't have shown during the screencast and then some that might have been. Next month for winging it, maybe we'll do the web inspector tools. We had a very welcoming audience for that. There's some people in the chat that said they would enjoy that. So check us out next month. If you'd like to support us, please like and subscribe. And if you want any more from Oddbird, we invite you to check out our newsletter. It should be going out sometime probably next week. Oddbird.dev/oddnews. Anything else, Miriam, that you want to talk about, promote?
No, I don't think so.
All right. Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you all for tuning in. Remember that best practice is a conversation, so let's keep talking.